A warm welcome to everyone who's joining us for the session today from the International Peace Bureau. Today we are speaking on nuclear weapon-free zones, and we have a really great lineup of speakers for the event. So without further ado, I will turn the word over to our chair for the day, Enkhsaikhan, Jargalsaikhan, who will provide a quick introduction.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that I was looking forward to having to organize such a meeting because I think it is a very important issue today. Before doing that, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Enkhsaikhan. I'm from Mongolia. I'm a member of International Peace Bureau's Bureau and chairman of a Mongolian NGO called Blue Banner that focuses on issues related to nuclear weapons threats and how to overcome it and the role of NGOs in that. There was a hope after the end of the Cold War that nuclear threat would diminish. However, the situation today is becoming more worrisome, as reflected in the doomsday, I think, clock, which says that it's about only 90 seconds to the midnight, to the catastrophe. All 9 nuclear weapon states are modernizing their arsenals. Lately, we see politicization of arms control that is creating new geopolitical reality, erosion of arms control, and strategic stability. Implementation of the New START treaty was suspended, raising thus the risk of the last domino to fall. That should not be happening. Nuclear threat is increasing as is witnessed by the developments around the world and around the war in Ukraine. Besides the 9 nuclear armed states, meaning 5 nuclear weapon states and 4 others that have nuclear weapons, there are around 40 nuclear capable states also. So if the situation gets out of hand, there might be, some other countries that might, try to get hold of or try to make nuclear weapons as well. So this should not happen. We do not see these 9 states as security providers in this nuclear age, but rather as sources of nuclear threat. There is a saying that if you know that you are in a hole, then you should stop digging. However, all 9 states are trying to dig bigger holes for themselves. That should not happen. And I would like to say that hope is not a policy. Therefore, concrete actions of non-nuclear weapon states is needed. Last June, we held an international conference, hybrid conference in Mongolia in June. And we have all agreed that there is a definitely great need to strengthen nuclear weapon-free zones and work closer with the TPNW to contribute to a nuclear weapon-free world. That's the largest hope that we're trying to have. The objective of this 2-part webinar is to raise awareness of the role of non-nuclear weapon states in nuclear disarmament policies, raising the role. Besides putting political and legal pressures on nuclear armed states, there is a need also, in parallel, to increase the role of non-nuclear weapon states through strengthening the nuclear weapon-free zones regime. In this, civil society organizations can play a more active role. We're planning a 2-part webinar, as you have seen from the invitation. This is the first one. The second one is going to be held at the same time next week on the 30th of March. Today we have a terrific panel. The speakers will share their views on the issues related with nuclear weapon-free zones and are being provided with time to answer questions, to start some discussions on some of the issues that the participants might be interested in. Like most of the webinars, we believe that first we will hear the presentations, and then we'll open up the floor for questions, comments, and so on and so forth. I hope that this kind of arrangement will be very productive for both for the speakers as well as for the participants, which is very important. It should be two-way street in that. Now, I would like to briefly introduce our speakers. First is Dr. Professor Michael Hamel-Green. He teaches at Victoria University, the College of Arts in Melbourne. His research field is peace studies. He has focused on regional disarmament and security issues, particularly in Northeast Asian region and in Asia Pacific in general. He is author of many books and publications on nuclear weapons and especially on nuclear weapon-free zones. Therefore, his presence should be made the best use of by asking him the question that you want to ask, or you think that you would like to get some answers to that as well. Then we have two representatives of OPANAL. OPANAL is Agency for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean. Why we have invited them? Because OPANAL and Tlatelolco Treaty, states parties to the Tlatelolco Treaty, are the ones that have, they are the pioneers in this area. They will tell you why and so on, so forth and so on. And because after them, there were 4 other nuclear weapons zones have been established, and 3 nuclear weapon-free zones are being under consideration. So it will be Natalia, Zhurina, and Alain Ponce Blancas. They will be speaking about this, the question of OPANAL. Then I have the honor to say that we have Dr. Tarja Cronberg, who is Distinguished Fellow, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI in short. She works there at European Security Program. She has a long record of activities, both as an academic in security and peace studies, as well as politician in foreign and security areas. I had the honor of reading a number of her presentations, as well as the book that she has written about the European Union's negotiations with Iran on the Iranian nuclear program. Then we will hear from Rainer Braun, who is peace activist, historian, and journalist. He served as executive director of International Peace Bureau. I personally consider him as a walking encyclopedia regarding civil society activities in peace and security and other issues with which the IPP has been dealing for decades. So with this introduction, I would like now to ask Michael Hamel-Green to make his presentation. You have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to IPP and yourself for inviting me to speak. So I've been asked to give just a general introduction to nuclear weapon-free zones and their benefits. And I hope I won't be overlapping too much with the other speakers in the seminar, which are covering things in a very comprehensive way. Nuclear-free zones are one of the less publicized but very important parts of international efforts to reduce nuclear threats and eliminate nuclear weapons. The sovereign right of states to denuclearize their own region or territory is recognized in the Central Non-Proliferation Treaty. Article 6 affirmed the right of states to conclude treaties, and I quote, to assure the total absence of nuclear weapons in their respective territories. Nuclear weapon-free zones have been successfully established in many parts of the globe by either regional groups of states or single countries, or in international spaces or territory. The very first was the 1959 Antarctic Treaty, demilitarizing and denuclearizing the whole Antarctic continent. There followed 6 more zones, all in populated regions. These include the 67 Latin American Tlatelolco Treaty, the 1985 South Pacific Rarotonga Treaty, the 1995 Southeast Asian Bangkok Treaty, the 1996 African Penindarban Treaty, the 2006 Central Asian Treaty, and the 1998 UN recognition of Mongolia as a single state nuclear weapon-free zone. The land territories of the whole Southern Hemisphere are now almost entirely covered by such treaties, along with large parts of the Northern Hemisphere in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. Nuclear-free zones have been created at various times, both before and both during and after the Cold War. They continue to be actively pursued in new regions, such as the Middle East, Northeast Asia, South Asia, and the Arctic. If anything, these zones are becoming ever more urgent as we enter a new period of conflict, arms racing, and of course, the Russian unilateral invasion of Ukraine. In some cases, regional states have established nuclear weapon-free zones as a direct result of a terrifying threat of nuclear war on their own doorstep, as the Latin American countries did over 1964-67 following the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, the crisis that nearly engulfed the whole world in nuclear annihilation. Others have established zones following mounting concern over radioactive health impacts when nuclear powers chose to test weapons in their region. This was the case in the South Pacific, when island states in Australia and New Zealand established a nuclear weapon-free zone after decades of nuclear testing in their region by the United States, the UK, and France. In the case of some regions, the main concern was to prevent or reverse existing proliferation that had already occurred in the region, as in the case of the 1995 African zone, when the apartheid-era South African regime acquired nuclear weapons. Similarly, the 2006 Central Asian zone, which had long been used by the former Soviet Union for both testing and deploying nuclear weapons. And then there are some regional states that are hedged in by nuclear powers or have experienced very lengthy interventions by nuclear powers, such as the Southeast Asia, the Vietnam War and other wars there, and Mongolia. They have also decided to establish nuclear weapon-free zones. And the aim there is to prevent their territories becoming embroiled or targeted in new conflicts between external nuclear powers. So how is a nuclear weapon-free zone defined? In 1975, and this is after, of course, the precedent set by the Tlatelolco Treaty, the UN defined such a zone as requiring, I quote, the total absence of nuclear weapons, unquote, through a treaty or convention. It must have an international system of verification and control, and obligations by nuclear states to respect the statute of total absence of nuclear weapons, and most importantly, to provide non-use or threat of use negative security guarantees. So why have countries chosen the nuclear-free path? What are the benefits for regional groups or individual states in establishing such zones? The benefits are both regional and global. So first, looking at the regional aspect, at the regional level, the key benefits are in seeking to prevent or reverse 2 sources of nuclear threat in any particular region. The first is the threat posed by external nuclear powers, basing, deploying, testing, or targeting the region with nuclear weapons. So nuclear-free zones seek to do this through protocols in which the nuclear weapon states provide the guarantees not to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons against its own parties, and to respect the non-stationing provisions in the region and in territories that they themselves have within the region. Some of the zones have successfully achieved recognition from all 5 of the NPT recognized nuclear states, such as the Latin American, South Pacific, African, and Central Asian zones, but most are still pursuing full ratification. They've got signatures, but not full ratification. The Southeast Asian Bangkok Treaty, that has yet to receive any signature to its negative security protocol. But quite recently, in 2021, China has declared its willingness to sign. So far, the very first of the NPT recognized nuclear powers to make this undertaking. In the absence of a central binding agreement to provide negative security assurances to non-nuclear states, nuclear weapon-free zones actually provide an avenue for securing binding guarantees through these protocols, the protocols that the nuclear powers are asked to sign and ratify. As tensions rise in the Northeast Asian region associated with North Korean proliferation and heightened US-China military confrontation, particularly in the South China Sea, there is now even greater urgency for pursuing non-use or threat of use guarantees for the Southeast Asian zone, and also to be taking steps to actually establish a Northeast Asian nuclear weaponry zone to denuclearize the region and secure such guarantees. And there's a lot of thinking that's been put in this. I know one of the other speakers will be talking about this later, I think in the second seminar. The second source of nuclear threat that nuclear weapon-free zones are there to do something about lies within the region itself. There may be moves within a region for one or more countries to acquire nuclear weapons. This was certainly the case during the early period of the Latin American zone, when military regimes existed in both Argentina and Brazil. And it took some time and the advent of civilian governments in both countries before they were prepared to bring the Nuclear-Free Zone Treaty into force for their countries, and to establish between themselves an additional bilateral aid-backed monitoring agency. So in this region, in Latin America, the Zone Treaty proved ultimately successful in preventing a source of nuclear proliferation that might have threatened the whole region. And now all countries in Latin America have committed to that treaty. In regions where proliferation has already occurred, nuclear-free zones can play an important role in dismantling or destroying existing nuclear weapons and nuclear weapon infrastructure, as the African zone did in the case of South Africa, and the Central Asian zone is doing in relation to former Soviet nuclear weapon deployment and infrastructure. Each region may also have its particular or unique nuclear-related problems that the nuclear-free zone can be tailored to address. Where nuclear weapon testing has been taking place, it can seek both to prevent further such testing through an additional protocol and to secure commitments to rehabilitate areas affected by testing. The South Pacific Nuclear-Free Zone was very successful in this area, with a separate protocol that binds nuclear weapon states from testing anywhere in the zone, including international waters within the zone. The protocol, now ratified by France, the only one of the nuclear powers who continued testing at Mururoa in French Polynesia right up until 1996. So far, all the existing nuclear weapon-free zones have been relatively successful in achieving their key objectives, certainly in preventing proliferation in each of the region, preventing stationing of nuclear weapons by external powers, and at least getting signatures to their negative security protocols from the recognized nuclear powers, with the exception I mentioned before, the Southeast Asian zone. However, work remains on applying continuing pressure on the nuclear states to fully ratify the relevant negative security protocols. Some nuclear powers have been dragging their feet, despite the fact that it seems in all states' interest to be reducing the threat of and incentives for further proliferation. It's ironical that in case of the Southeast Asian nuclear weapons zone, it's the much maligned China, who critics currently accuse of not being committed to a rules-based order, that is so far the only nuclear power ready to sign and ratify the legally binding negative security protocol of the Bangkok Treaty. When it comes to establishing nuclear weapon-free zones, new such zones in parts of the world facing increasing threats, there is further benefit to such initiatives compared to relying solely on international instruments such as the Non-Proliferation Treaty. While linking into and reinforcing central non-proliferation and disarmament measures, nuclear weapon-free zones are probably easier to mobilize regional support by virtue of being able to focus on regional specific issues and needs and impacts and threats. In the current context, especially in Northeast Asia, the increasing confrontation between nuclear powers poses greater and greater risks of nuclear war by miscalculation, accident, or escalation from a conventional war, especially given the very short response times of minutes between missile-targeted cities or military bases. Such developments most certainly underlie the importance of establishing nuclear weapon-free zones in all the crisis regions. Beyond the direct role and contributions that nuclear-free zones can play in reducing the nuclear threat in their own regions, they can also and do play a major role in contributing to global non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament. Within the debates of the UN General Assembly and in other forums, nuclear weapon-free zone member states have been particularly active in calling for full ratification of their negative security protocols and in pursuing more comprehensive disarmament initiatives, especially the 2017 Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. In the case of the latter, two nuclear weapon-free zone member state conferences convened by OPANAL between 2005 and 2010 were very helpful antecedents in building support for the further international conferences on the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons and the subsequent UN negotiations to establish the TPNW. While the existing zones have already taken steps to work together to promote disarmament and non-proliferation, a recent Vienna Disarmament Center report on cooperation between nuclear-free zones recommended regular mechanisms of communication between the zones. And it called for nuclear-free zones to seek a further comprehensive study, UN comprehensive study of nuclear weapon-free zones, for there to be disarmament education initiatives for diplomats, cross-regional seminars. I suppose this is an example of a cross-regional seminar. Better links with UN regional centers for peace and disarmament. And at least one of the zones was in fact established under the auspice of the Asia-Pacific one. That's the Central Asian nuclear-free zone. And also for zones to actually cooperate in public responses to nuclear crises, and of course to continue their joint conferences on nuclear-free zone issues, and particularly on the issue of negative security guarantees. The Vienna Center's report concluded, and I quote, "Nuclear weapon-free zones have the potential to become a major force in the move towards a world without nuclear weapons. This potential can only be ensured if they cooperate to fully realize the benefits proposed by the zones." The recent nuclear weapon state development of dual use and hypersonic missiles, coupled with ever shorter delivery times, is making the threat of preemptive, miscalculated or accidental nuclear war frighteningly likely at any time, particularly in the context of possible escalation from the Ukraine war or Middle East tensions or the confrontation going on in the South China Sea and over Taiwan. Such current developments should be concentrating governments and leaders' minds on the urgency of putting much greater diplomatic effort into pursuing multilateral negotiations to end the arms race spiral, particularly in the Asia-Pacific and Middle East, and to seek a negotiated solution to the Ukraine conflict. Part of that, such negotiation should involve reconsidering the value of consolidating existing nuclear weapon-free zones and renewing efforts to establish new such zones. A key proposal to which Ambassador Enkhsaikhan will be speaking in the second part of this seminar is the potential encouragement of single states to become nuclear weapon-free zones. This particularly applies to states bordered by nuclear powers or by countries that have military alliances with nuclear powers. Mongolia has certainly pioneered the single state nuclear weapon-free zone approach. There are a number of other states who might pursue such an arrangement. As the UN and other disarmament advocates and even leaders at some state, not so long ago, even leaders of the 5 NPT nuclear powers have frequently declared a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. The particular role that nuclear weapon-free zones can play has never been better expressed than by the Nobel Prize-winning Mexican diplomat Ambassador Alfonso Garcia Robles, the main architect of the Latin American nuclear-free zone. He argued in 1974 that nuclear weapon-free zones provide the path for, and I quote, "a gradual broadening of the zones of the world for which nuclear weapons are prohibited to a point where the territories of powers which possess these terrible weapons of mass destruction would be something like contaminated islets subject to quarantine. Robles' vision of how nuclear weapon-free zones might shrink the areas where nuclear weapons were viewed as a legitimate part of regional security has already been realized across the whole southern hemisphere and many parts of the northern hemisphere. And now the challenge is to expand them further in the new era of nuclear confrontation we are facing. So I'll end at that point. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sure that there will be many questions. At least I put down 2 questions at that, but we will come to the question and answer session later on.
Yes.
So now I would like to invite our 2 colleagues from OPANAL to make the presentations, Natalia Zhurina and Alain Ponce Blancas. And as I have already said, OPANAL is a pioneer in nuclear weapon-free zone issues. That's why we're looking forward to listening to them, to get some inspiration and the challenges they faced and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. And of course, congratulations on conducting such an important and timely webinar. We are happy to join you. It's 6 a.m. here in Mexico City, but we're still happy to join you. Well, we will tell you briefly about the Treaty of Tlatelolco and its role in the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. We will start, first with sharing our presentation. We will start with the brief historical background and the context that led to the negotiation of the treaty, the Tlatelolco Treaty, that established the first nuclear weapon-free zone in a densely populated area. So it started in 1958 with the Costa Rican proposal for the regional denuclearization that was made in the margins of the Organization of American States. So it was like the first step. The second step was 4 years later, when Brazil presented to the first committee of the United Nations General Assembly a draft resolution for the denuclearization of Latin America. And the same year, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. So of course, it was the time when the countries of the region felt the nuclear threat. And of course, this Cuban Missile Crisis contributed to the momentum of the creating of the nuclear weapon-free zone in the region. And that's why in 1963, the presidents of 5 countries, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, and Mexico, issued a declaration of the denuclearization of Latin America that stated that their governments are prepared to sign a multilateral Latin American agreement whereby their countries would undertake not to manufacture, receive, store, or test nuclear weapons or nuclear launching devices. And the same year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the resolution that endorsed this declaration. And this resolution also represented like the support of the international community to the creation of such a zone free of nuclear weapons. So that's why in 1964, the work started. The preliminary meeting on the denuclearization of Latin America, REUPRAL, took place. 17 countries participated in this meeting, and they were adopted like a series of resolutions. And one of them included the decision to create the preparatory commission for the denuclearization of Latin America, COPREDAL, that would be in charge of actually negotiating of the treaty that would establish a zone free of nuclear weapons in the region. So in 1965 to 1967, the preparatory commission for the denuclearization of Latin America took place. The commission elected the famous Mexican ambassador Alfonso Garcia Robles as a president of the meetings. Well, actually, several years after, Alfonso Garcia Robles was won the Nobel Peace Prize for the successful negotiating of the treaty and for his contribution to the nuclear weapon-free zones. So in 1967, on the 12th of February, the treaty, the text of the treaty was adopted unanimously, and 2 days later, the treaty was opened for signature. It is worth mentioning that at the last meeting of the COPREDAL, 21 countries from the region and 22 countries from out of the region, like from other regions, attended the meeting, and this is relevant for two reasons. First reason is that the treaty was negotiated in a very transparent way, and it also helped to enable the participation of the nuclear weapon-free nuclear weapon states in the negotiation of the treaty, which was very important because, as my colleague will later tell you, this enabled them to be part of the additional protocols of the treaty that provided the negative security assurances to the member states, to the states party of the Treaty of Tlatelolco. So another reason why this extra-regional, the participation of those extra-regional countries were important is because well, it demonstrates that well, yeah, I've already mentioned that the transparency, but also the importance of starting the treaty, negotiating the treaty, even when not all the countries are on board. For instance, for the Treaty of Tlatelolco, it was only in 2002 when Cuba, the last country joined the treaty. But anyway, the treaty was in full functioning, and this is one of the lessons learned that we actually share with other nuclear weapon-free zones and with other future possible nuclear weapon-free zones, that a lesson learned that could be applied for instance, the nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, that it is important to start negotiations even when not all the countries are on board. And now I'll give the floor to my colleague, Alain.
Thank you, Natalia. So moving on the main provisions of the treaty. In addition to what Natalia said, I mean, the treaty is a very well-crafted, very straightforward instrument. So this is it is amazing that only that the negotiation, the inception, and the opening for signature of such a treaty, it took only 3 years, from the real prior meetings till the opening for signature. So these 32 articles as part of the Tlatelolco Treaty, I will point out some of the principles and the main provisions. So in this case, you can see part of the preamble. So in this preambular section, the Latin American states and diplomats, they portrayed their intentions in order to create and consolidate such an instrument. And part of that is a mere reflect of the times during the 60s and the heights of the Cold War, but also and something that it was really important for Latin American states from the very beginning, to ensure the inalienable right to developing the nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. So that's reflected in preamble in preambular part. On Article 1, you can see the activities and why are exactly the prohibitions envisioned by the treaty. So you can see a list of activities regarding nuclear weapons, any form of possession, directly or indirectly by the parties themselves or by anyone. And in the second part of this provision, it also has like an additional obligation on themselves that they refrain to not take directly or indirectly whatsoever to the participation, creation, and testing, manufacture of nuclear weapons. So this is like a provision that has like these two sides of obligations. The other interesting part of the Tlatelolco Treaty is on Article 3, 4, and 5 that define very well the areas in which the treaty will take place, and this is the zone of application. So we will see later on like why the zone of application was or is still one of the key elements of the Treaty of Tlatelolco. So basically, it covers specifically with coordinates that these coordinates to somehow reflect the Treaty of Inter-American Assistance back at the days. So they took some of these examples to craft the zone of application that consists in the sum of the territories of the countries, but also include some parts of the high seas. And we will see a little later on why this was a little bit controversial at the time. And also the Article 5, it provides the first definition of nuclear weapons. Some would argue that it was Euratom that was the first instrument introducing this definition, but in terms of a non-proliferation disarmament treaty, this is like the one that established such a definition. So moving on the control system and go back to Natalia.
Thank you. Well, in order to preserve the nuclear weapon-free status of the region, the treaty established the control system. It is the first international monitoring and verification system to ensure compliance with the disarmament and non-proliferation obligations of the states parties to the Treaty of Tlatelolco. So the control system, as mentioned on the slide, is covered by several articles of the Treaty of Tlatelolco and is observed by two agencies, OPANAL and the IAEA. So the OPANAL plays more of a political role. Member states submit their reports to the Secretariat twice a year, informing that no activity prohibited by the Treaty of Tlatelolco took place in their respective territories. And the IAEA plays like a technical role here. Each member state of OPANAL has a safeguard agreement with the IAEA, and it is written in the treaty that in case of being necessary, the IAEA would send an inspection to a country to verify their compliance with the treaty. So 56 years later, we haven't witnessed such a necessity, but still it is in theory, it is possible. So very briefly about the OPANAL structure. There are three main I think it's another slide, the previous one. So there are three main bodies of the OPANAL. We have the General Conference. This is the supreme organ. All the main decisions are taken by the General Conference. The General Conference meets every 2 years on the ordinary sessions, but also like in practice, actually, the General Conference is celebrated every year and through some special sessions of the General Conference. So another body is the Council, which is comprised of 5 member states. actually the General Conference elects the members of the Council. So currently, Belize, Brazil, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua are member states of the Council, and they were elected for a period of 4 years. The Council meets every 2 years. And of course, the Secretariat, we have the Secretary General, which is also elected by the General Conference, and he's a Chief Administrative Officer. Now he's of a Brazilian nationality. His name is Flavio Roberto Bonsanini. And of course, the staff, which is appointed by the Secretary General. And now back to Alain.
So moving on, as Dr. Hamel-Green already mentioned, this morning, evening, the nuclear weapon-free zones introduced like some mechanism, some legal mechanism in order to ensure that the nuclear weapon states, and in this case, also states with some de jure or de facto responsibility, territorial responsibility in the zones, that they committed themselves to preserve the denuclearized nature of the zone, but also to provide the guarantees of not using nuclear weapons against these states, the so-called negative security assurances. So as Dr. Hamel-Green already mentioned, Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the nuclear weapon-free zones that has all the additional protocols signed by the P5. But the thing is that we have this challenge in which these 4 of the 5 states parties to these protocols, they issued an interpretative declarations upon the signing of the additional protocols. So in some cases, these interpretative declarations, they constitute reservations, even though the reservations are not allowed by the treaty. Moving on with why is the Treaty of Tlatelolco still relevant? I mean, we already mentioned like some of the key precedents that made the treaty. It was the first legally binding instrument creating this nuclear weapon-free zone in a densely populated area, as Dr. Hamel-Green already mentioned. Was this Antarctic Treaty that precedes the Tlatelolco Treaty. Of course, this is the first instrument in providing this definition of nuclear weapons. Of course, this is an instrument that precedes and goes beyond the NPT, because there are like some provisions in the NPT that are cannot be explained without the existence and the concrete influence of the Treaty of Tlatelolco, particularly on Articles 3, 4, 6, and 7, and some of them already mentioned by Dr. Hamel-Green. And most relevant, and I think this is also timely, it set this key precedent for what it is now, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
And well, our last slide also, why is the Treaty of Tlatelolco still relevant? Well, the experience of the region provided the necessary political capital and moral stature to get involved in multilateral negotiations on nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. So this is why the member states of OPANAL have been very active and very vocal on the negotiation and the entry into force and the adoption of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. OPANAL is very actively presented at the main international fora related to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. For instance, at the NPT review process conferences, OPANAL member states always submit the working paper. OPANAL Secretariat also submits the memorandum regarding the activities of the agency. So yeah, OPANAL also participated in in the first meeting of the states parties to the TPNW, and will participate in the second meeting this year. So, but also OPANAL serves as a platform for for its member states, where they can negotiate some joint positioning and well, statements. For instance, well, yeah, the Latin America and the Caribbean is the only region in the world that at least twice a year issues a declaration or a communique or a statement regarding the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. So, for instance, it's on the 26th of September, on the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, and also on the 14th of February, not because of the St. Valentine's Day, but because of the anniversary of the Treaty of Tlatelolco. So these are like the main occasions where the member states of OPANAL issue communiques and declarations. And these documents are published on our website, so you can have a look. It has like well, yeah, the position of the region regarding the current situation in arms control, in disarmament and non-proliferation, regarding some, I don't know, international instruments, and well, it's on in these documents. So yeah, and also another important part of our job is, and it's not a secret, is to establish and maintain this this cooperation with other nuclear weapon-free zones, because as Alain already mentioned, we are more than 160 countries that are part of the nuclear weapon-free zone. So it is very important for us to join our efforts and to be vocal and yeah, contribute to the establishment of new nuclear weapon-free zones. So that is why we are working on formalizing these relations with other nuclear weapon-free zones through cooperation agreements, through memorandum of understanding. We already have two memorandums of understanding with other two nuclear weapon-free zones, and we are currently negotiating other cooperation agreements with other nuclear weapon-free zones. So the idea is to just keep working together and join our efforts in the international fora, I don't know, exchange information relevant to all the nuclear weapon-free zones, invite each other to the events that we organize, organize events together. So this is what we are currently dealing with. Well, we will finish our presentation here. Thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia and Alain. I think it was quite substantive presentations, but there will be some questions. At least I have one or two questions as well, because I try to see the things which should make it stronger and better in that sense. Now, the third speaker is Dr. Tarja Cronberg, who would be speaking on overview of the hotspot and strengthening of the P5 security assurances, one of the most important issues connected with nuclear weapon-free zones. Tarja, you have the floor, please. Unmute. Tarja, unmute.
Sorry, I will try to be very brief so that you have time for questions also. First of all, I am a fan of nuclear weapon-free states, the zones, and I think it is important to sort of see it as a way to reach the nuclear weapon-free world. And maybe it's the only way. So I will try to look at three challenges. First of all, do the security guarantees that are given to the nuclear weapon-free zones, do they actually secure the zones? And secondly, to look at how the influence that has been talked here about working together and maybe enhancing the cooperation, how could it actually lead to raising the importance and influence of nuclear weapon-free zones. Like it was said, it's sort of a most unpublished, most unknown part of the nuclear order. And my personal perspective is that it should be the most influential part of the nuclear order. And the third question is, in order to achieve the nuclear weapon-free world through nuclear weapon-free zones, it is extremely important we have some innovative ideas how the zones, how the potential zones where there are nuclear weapon-free, where there are nuclear weapon states could become nuclear weapon-free, and I have worked especially on the Middle East. So with these three things in the background, first something about the security guarantees in general. When the NPT was accepted, it was sort of seen as a moral implication that all the P5 nuclear weapon states should give guarantees to the non-nuclear states. This is sort of the idea. The treaty separates states to nuclear states and non-nuclear states. And so as a price for becoming non-nuclear, at least there should be security guarantees that the non-nuclear states don't attack with nuclear weapons. And so the first time in 1995, there was the meeting of the NPT review conference, there was general statements by all the P5 not to attack non-nuclear weapon states unless they are in alliance with a nuclear weapon alliance. So that means that any country, for example, my own country is becoming member of NATO. If we would attack any of the countries, we would do this being a member of the alliance. So in this sense, the alliance condition was given. Secondly, the general security guarantees have been watered down. Today, nuclear attack by a nuclear weapon state can take place if a state is attacked by biological weapons, by chemical weapons. Also the Trump nuclear posture review talks about critical infrastructure. And critical infrastructure is sort of spreading the possibility of a nuclear attack to almost anything. Almost anything can be seen as a critical infrastructure. And now I heard that there's a movement ongoing which actually would even water down that nuclear attacks could take place if some attacks were sort of using new emerging technologies. So you have all this watering down on the general security guarantees. And also, just a final comment on the general part, actually the security guarantees have a very bad reputation today because of the Budapest Memorandum. Actually, in 1994, the US, United Kingdom and Russia together guaranteed the security of Ukrainian borders. And what happened, of course, in 2014, Crimea was occupied. And secondly, this was Russian aggression, and they said, well, the country is new. And secondly, the US and the UK did not do anything. They said that the guarantees were not legal. So we are facing with a concept that is not very well seen by the nuclear weapon states, and it is very understandable because in the nuclear order, calculated ambiguity of the nuclear threats are a basis of being able to threaten but not using a weapon. So in a way, threats that are sort of, threats have to be credible and they have to be somehow ambiguous in order to be able to be used as nuclear threats. So we are actually facing the calculative ambiguity, and this has been very often the case, for example, when the US was discussing the signing of the African treaty, there was this idea that, yes, we cannot sign it because it is, we need this ambiguity of not saying that we will never do this. We will never attack you with nuclear weapons. So this is one of the critical aspects in here. Now moving to the nuclear weapon-free zones. I think it's very important to say that the nuclear weapon-free zones need unconditional security guarantees, not watered down by biological weapons, not watered down by chemical weapons, not watered down by a critical infrastructure, and not watered down by new technology. So it is extremely important that the security guarantees are unconditional. And like I said, they are not this now. Not only that, not every country has signed the like security protocols, like Michael was saying. The US is the only one. The only one the US has signed is the Latin American one, and the Bangkok is only one that has signed. So it's really a problem, and it's also a problem because it's only the P5. It should actually be all the 9 nuclear weapon states. I think India has sort of come up with some kind of a declaration in terms of this. I think the others should do the same. But I think the advantage, the seriousness of the nuclear weapon-free zones, also for the nuclear weapon state, should lie in the fact that these zones, the countries in these zones, have a double commitment to nuclear weapon-free status. They are all members of the NPT, and they are all members of the zone. So they have this double commitment not to become nuclear. Furthermore, none of the states in any nuclear weapon-free zone have ever left the zone or have started a nuclear program, as far as we know. So this is extremely important, because the usual criticism by the nuclear states about nuclear weapon-free world is that somebody may start again, come up with nuclear weapons. This is not the case of the zones. Nobody has left a zone, which I think is a very important commitment. So, and the regional organization is very, very good. But in a way, the regional organization is only regional. And I have talked with Enkhsaikhan many times about this, that the regional organizations are very different also. Some are stronger, like the OPANAL, and some are less strong. And so I think it's important to have a global organization, of all countries in nuclear weapon-free zones. This would mean a lot, because this would 116 states or 118 states would be a majority of the world. And if you wanted to affect NPT, I mean, if the 116 states that if we don't get unconditional security guarantees, and which are legally based, then we'll walk out of the review conference. And I'm sure that you would get the signatures of all the states if they, on the other hand, faced the view that they would lose the NPT. The nuclear weapon states, they want to guard their ability to have nuclear weapons, and they will do everything to guarantee the survival of the NPT. So this would be my proposal, a global organization. And also we have talked with Enkhsaikhan about who would pay for this, who would actually finance a global organization of all the nuclear weapon-free zones. I think after the Ukraine war, it has gone up to everybody that nuclear threats are a problem. They are legal in some situations, and we are actually on the verge today of a nuclear war. So in this way, I think global organization, I'm sure there is a foundation somewhere, and I think I will be willing to cooperate to find one to get funding for this global organization of all the nuclear weapon-free zones. And I think the program of this organization should be to guarantee that the security guarantees the zones receive are legally based. There are so many, especially in the states, that say that these are not, even if it's signed and ratified, it's not legal, it's only an agreement and so forth. So my country, Finland, at the review conference of the NPT in August, actually proposed that all these security guarantees by nuclear weapon states to nuclear weapon-free zones would be a legal document, a treaty. And that this treaty, it could be a separate treaty, of course, but it could also be a treaty annexed to the NPT. The NPT cannot be changed without all the 5 P5 members agreeing. So they have also a veto right to the NPT. But basically, I think with the impact of all the nuclear weapon-free zone states, I think this should be possible. The second thing is that they should be unconditional. This idea of watering down and finding more and more ways to water them down is not very up to date. And I have 2 more points I would like to make. One is that, as I said, I have worked with the Middle East zone. That's maybe the most impossible zone, because it has been underway for 50 years. It was agreed in 1995. At the time, the NPT was made permanent. And in 2012, there should have been a conference to define the progress of the nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. And if you have been to the NPT review conferences, all the Arab states, all the Middle East states, they say that this resolution from 1995 should finally be implemented. And what I would like to say here is that there's this possibility. We all know that Israel is the problem. And we all know that Israel doesn't participate in the yearly UN meetings where the other countries discuss this concept of a Middle East nuclear weapon-free zone. But we also know that Israel's argument is that they don't want to get rid of their weapons in the beginning of the zone. And like it was said about the Latin American zone, the treaty was made before everybody joined. And so in the Middle East, politically, it should be possible to agree on a treaty where, and this is important now, that unconditional and legally based nuclear guarantees of not attacking any of the states would be guaranteed by all nuclear weapon states. Iran, Saudi Arabia, all the Arab countries, they need some guarantees if they want to go in and work for the treaty and sign the treaty. On the other hand, one could say that this could provide for Israel to become a member, give these guarantees initially, and then at a certain point in time, which is defined in the treaty, become a member. So my point here is that we need new ideas about how to work with states with nuclear weapons and nuclear weapon-free zones. This applies to Europe. It has been discussed whether Europe could be dealt with some regions. Also in North Korea and in the Far East, there's this idea that 3 countries would become non-nuclear: Japan, South Korea, and North Korea, and security guarantees would be provided by Russia, China, and the US. But for example, this nuclear weapon-free zone, it has to be done very quickly before both South Korea and Japan get nuclear weapons. It's right on the doorstep. So, and my final point is that in order for the nuclear protocols of the nuclear weapon-free zones, they should be signed by all 9 nuclear weapon states and not only by the P5. So this was my presentation, and I sent Alessandra the article. I published an article on the model, which was published by the International Journal of Peace and Nuclear Disarmament. And Alessandra, can you put it on the chat, the reference to this, or shall I try to find it somewhere?
It's in the chat.
It's been sent.
Okay.
In the chat. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This was what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you very much, Tarja, for your presentation and for sharing your own views on some of the issues that we have to think about, the important issues that would affect and strengthen nuclear weapon-free zones, and that might even go beyond that as well. Now, the next person that we have invited to speak is Rainer Brown. As I have said, he served as executive director of International Peace Bureau, and he has a lot of experience on many international issues. And I thought that we would like to hear his view, his own view on nuclear weapon-free zones, the strength and weaknesses as well, and what we can do. Rainer, please.
Yeah, thank you, Enkhsaikhan. As a dear colleagues and friends, I was asked to say something what we can do to bring the question of nuclear weapon-free zones again much higher on the agenda of the international peace movements and maybe other social movements. You know, you all remember, I think, with great hope, the time of the 80s, when nuclear weapon-free zones were a key point of international activities of the peace movement. No declaration of the international peace movement, the anti-nuclear weapons movement, which mentioned nuclear weapon-free zones. And today, it's the work of some distinguished personalities that we have not forgotten nuclear weapon-free zones. Enkhsaikhan, Tarja, Michael, and others. But it's not a part of the international actions of the peace movement and how it can come back. And I will try to offer some thoughts how it can come back. But in the beginning, I think I have to say we should be very realistic because of all the challenges the peace movement in the world is facing. And the Ukrainian war is only one of them, even when it is a very important one. And the fight for negotiation and ceasefire in Ukrainian war is definitely one of the key challenges for the international peace movement. But what to do? And I think I have first a very easy answer. I think we have to bring the question of nuclear weapons-free zones and nuclear weapon-free states back to the General Assembly of the United Nations. And I think what we need is a new report of the United Nations about nuclear weapon-free zones and nuclear weapon-free states. And I mentioned both, and I will come back why I mentioned the states specifically. You know, and I think we can work that is on the agenda of the next General Assembly, and that the next General Assembly decide to organize a new report after so many years. I think this is important and needed. This means it will be a part of the discussion of the international community, and it will forces the peace movements in the different countries to help that the report will be developed in a correct way and that we can be a part of these discussions. So for me, this could be a first step which we immediately can start in the different countries. And second, I think we need specific activities to understand the challenge and the possibility of nuclear weapon-free states. I don't know your experience. When I'm saying Mongolia is the only nuclear weapon-free state, my colleagues are looking at me that I'm coming from the moon. They don't know about it. So we need more of these states. And we need activities in specific countries for these states. And I will mention, Tarja is here. You know, Finland and Sweden both became absolutely against my will, a member of NATO. But they were both declaring that they don't want to have nuclear weapons and they don't want to have nuclear weapons on their soil. So why they could not declare themselves as nuclear weapon-free states? And this needs activity and action from the peace movement. And I think we can add other countries to such a list where it will be possible to have more nuclear weapon-free states in the world. I think when you are looking to the map, you will see that there are possibilities in quite a lot of Central Asian countries, Pacific countries, and others, which could be a nuclear weapon-free state. What else I think is possible and needed? I think it must become a part of the international agenda. And this means we should have activities and actions around the NPT and the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapon Conference, discussing nuclear weapon-free states and nuclear weapon-free zones again. When do we have for the last time a side event? The nuclear weapon-free zones at the NPT conference. We need this for the different nuclear weapon-free zones, for the connections, and also for the discussion, and I'm very much in favor of this, for a global organization, global international organization of all the nuclear weapon-free zones. So, but this must be discussed in the specific events, NPT, Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and maybe as a part of the draft for the General Assembly when you want to get a new UN report. These are steps which I think easily could be done without having a mass movement against nuclear weapons, but it could promote and bring the nuclear weapon-free zones again on the agenda. And two more ideas. One idea is I think we should connect the question of nuclear weapon-free zones with other existing campaigns. For example, when we are discussing about military bases, for example, in Okinawa, we have to connect this question of military bases with the question of nuclear weapon-free zones and nuclear weapon-free states. Why should Okinawa not be a nuclear weapon-free island? And we should campaigning for that as a part of Okinawa without military bases. And the same, I think, is with the question of nuclear sharing. We have the nuclear sharing countries. When you want to overcome nuclear sharing, this would be a big step for a nuclear weapon-free zone in the center of Europe. Italy, Belgium, Dutch, Germany. So, and this could be also a step, having a nuclear weapon-free zone in Central Europe as a process, because we have the problem of the nuclear weapons in Great Britain and above all in France. But maybe this could be a part of the campaign in the direction of a nuclear weapon-free zone in Central Europe. So my suggestion is that we, on this basic of our ideas, and these ideas which I present are not really new ideas, but we have specific discussions about it, but maybe it could be developed as a working paper for future common activities of our group, because this is my final thought. I think we need an international coalition or an international network of activists working for nuclear weapon-free zones, like we have the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons network, and like we have other networks. So that is permanently again coming back to the agenda of the international peace movement, of the anti-nuclear weapons movement, and on the agenda of the United Nations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rainer. As I was expecting, you came up with very good practical ideas. Let us see, whether we can move this issue further in this area. Now, I think we have exhausted the list of speakers, and that's why I would like to thank all of them for their contributions. Now we're going to turn to the second part, which should be a very interesting and very rewarding part. That is questions and answers, as well as sharing your views about the issues that have been discussed here. As a moderator, perhaps I'll ask one or two questions while others are thinking about it. With respect to this issue that was, I think, underlined by almost all the speakers, was, of course, the security assurances that we expect that the P5 countries should provide or expected to provide to nuclear weapon-free zones. And as some of our people have already said, their security assurances are not taken very seriously by them as well as by the state parties to nuclear weapon-free zones. So one question is whether it would be possible to ask the International Court of Justice for advisory opinion on this, whether the statements made by nuclear weapon states when signing the protocols, whether they would be having legally binding force or not, because they are the protocols to international treaties. So legally they should have the same status. Now, of course, the nuclear weapon states, as I understand, they are not very much supportive of that. But let us listen to the views of the International Court of Justice. This is one question. I have a number of questions, but I'll ask another question, perhaps about the Budapest Memorandum. I don't know who would be answering, but I think the Budapest Memorandum shows that political declarations signed even at the highest level does not mean anything for the nuclear weapon states. So what do you think we should do in that sense? So this were the two short questions, but as I understand, Tarja has raised her hand. You have the floor, Tarja.
Thank you. I have looked at in the context of the Ukrainian war, I have looked at the question of whether Russian nuclear threats are legal or illegal. And first of all, a comment on the legality of these threats. I think there's this problem of survival. The International Court of Justice decided in '96 that threats and use of nuclear weapons is illegal unless there's a question of state survival. And now Russia is referring to state survival. Russia has come up with two comments on this. One is that the Western sanctions are questioning Russia's survival. And the second is that especially there was a statement by the defense secretary of the US in Poland about weakening Russia so it could never do the same, which also is used by Russia as a question of survival. And then there's another additional issue with the 4 regions they have opted to join Russia. If something happens to those regions, this is also a question of Russian survival. So my point is that the question of survival, the International Court of Justice has taken a point, but has not been able to decide what the question of survival is. So if these protocols are in the form of protocols only, I think the point would be to do to work for legal document, to work for international agreement on that these protocols are legally forced and documented. The Budapest Memorandum had exactly this problem. It was just an agreement between the countries, and Ukrainians asked at the time, I've looked at also at the Budapest Memorandum, the Ukrainians asked at the time, we need some more guarantees than is accepted in the memorandum, and the other countries, especially UK, but also US, said that this is enough. This is, we guarantee your borders, and what is it, 10 years later, the question is void. And many people, when I have interviewed about these guarantees, they say that unless they are very firmly based in international law, the countries can always, for political reasons, do anything. This applies not only to Russia, but also the other P5 in a situation where there's critical conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else is now raising a hand? Anyone
OPANAL has
else?
their hand up.
OPANAL, yes.
Thank you
OPANAL,
very much
yeah.
for the very interesting questions. And I will probably, if you allow me to answer the first question regarding the possibility of this involvement by the ICJ on the issue of nuclear security assurances, I would say that it is possible. It's always like an option for member states to ask the ICJ for this consultative opinion in a similar fashion as in the 1996 consultative opinion on the legality and the threat of nuclear weapons. But in this case, OPANAL and the member states have been applying a slightly different approach, at least at this point. Since there exists this interpretative declaration, as I mentioned earlier, in which the P5, in this case, only for states parties, they issued these declarations at the time of the signing the additional protocols. But the issue with the Treaty of Tlatelolco is that it is divided in these three parts: the preambular part, the main provision, and the additional protocol. So the Treaty of Tlatelolco cannot be fully understood and implemented without the three parts. And the additional protocols has the same legal status as the treaty itself. So right now, what we are trying or the member states of OPANAL are trying to do is to come to an agreement with these four states parties that issued this interpretative declaration to implement and to agree in an adjustment. And why do I mean by an adjustment? Is legally reinterpretation of what the main provisions of the declarations mean in like nowadays. For instance, not the entire interpretative declaration of one nuclear weapon state is troublesome for the member states, but only a couple of paragraphs, very concrete paragraphs that has to do with the zone of application and the nuclear security assurances. So what we are proposing is to agree on this legal document that will reinterpret and will come to an understanding of what this provision means for the state party that issued this interpretative declaration, as well as to the member states of OPANAL.
You're muted. Enkhsaikhan.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Alain. As I understand, Theo, I think there is someone else, Jane, who's participating in this meeting, also has asked a question. Can you repeat the question to everyone?
Yes, of course. So I will start just by addressing B and Jane question. It's in our chat. And he's wondering, as a South Asian specialist, none of the speakers referred to the challenges, risks, and threats posed by nuclear states of Pakistan and India. So as he refers, they're suffering from competitive nuclear psychology. And of course, there it is. He's just opening the space for some comments from all of you. And I personally have two questions here as well. But of course, the answers can be very brief. So as a Brazilian, first I will address my comrades here from Latin America. So first I will address this regionally, but of course this serves as example. My question is, Brazil is part of OPANAL, but for example, it's not a signer of the TPNW. And I wanted to ask what kinds of roles and actions organizations like OPANAL can take to push, to pressure other states that are part of the organization, but that have not signed treaties to engage and to sign those treaties, because OPANAL is so important, as you both have presented, but this is a lack that I see being Brazilian specifically. And the last question here of 3, now posing to all the speakers, this webinar supposedly was open as well for students, and also here bring the questions of engaging youth, bringing the theme of nuclear discussions to youth. Is always a challenge. It's not that much appealing, for example, as when we are nowadays dealing with climate crisis and everything like this. So I would like to as well hear some brief considerations on how do you think we could engage younger generations to deal with this kind of challenges? Thank you all.
And that question is addressed to whom?
To everybody, to everybody.
Okay. Michael, maybe you will start.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Yes. On the previous, you referred to, I think, Professor Jane's comments about no one mentioning South Asia. It certainly is a nightmare. It could happen at any time with the nuclear rivalry there and the constant tension between Pakistan and India. It may be that I understand that the regional organization there is very imbalanced between the huge India and Pakistan, and a country like Sri Lanka might be a possibility for a single state nuclear weapon-free zone as a kind of to try and highlight in that
like
region.
Maldives.
Pardon?
The Maldives.
Yes.
Maldives.
Yeah. So there was at the UN, I think, resolutions for a South Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. I think they could be further pursued, particularly with the encouragement of other nuclear weapon-free zones. It surely can't be in the security, the permanent security for Pakistan and India to continue as they're doing. The wider question of youth is an interesting one, because I mean, youth feels their whole future threatened by climate change, and so the environmental movement, I think, could be open to looking more closely at nuclear issues, particularly in the context of, as someone's mentioned, the Ukraine war raising awareness of nuclear issues. So I think there is a basis for pursuing nuclear weapon-free zones with environmental groups that are particularly attracting young people. Certainly, I'm in Australia, and there's a major concern within Australia, younger people as well as older people, about the new AUKUS agreement between Australia, US, and UK, and the nuclear submarines and the impact that will have on nuclear stability in our part of the world. I think there is a basis for involving youth, and I think, I mean, the peace movement has been very focused, of course, on the central measures, the TPNW and so on. But I think it may be right now to extend ways in which regions can raise the issues within their regions and have some chance of also attracting younger people in relation to that.
I think we have 3 speakers at the stage, so please be very short so that we'll be able to listen to the reactions to the questions or comments that you will be making. Rainer?
I have only a very short comment to the question of youth. First of all, the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons movement is ICAN is a youth movement. There are a lot of young people engaged in ICAN. So there are interesting people in the nuclear weapons issue and to bring to them also the question of nuclear weapon-free zones and the relations to the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the whole nuclear weapons issue. This is our job. I think they really don't know about the nuclear weapon-free zones question because no one was discussing this with them. So the second is, I think there are several entrance doors for the peace movement, and one entrance door is the anti-war position, and another entrance door is the question of AUKUS or like military bases. And I think both are strongly connected to nuclear weapons issues, so there are some chances to do it, and I think it is our job to use these chances and connect the nuclear weapons free zones question with other nuclear weapons and other peace questions. I think then we also can engage young people.
Thank you very much. The next question is from the duo from OPANAL. I don't know who will be asking the question or making the comment. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, just to briefly address the question on the TPNW. Well, first of all, if I'm not mistaken, there are about 2 or 3 countries from the region of Latin America and the Caribbean that signed but haven't ratified the TPNW, and there are also about 2 or 3 countries that haven't signed nor ratified the treaty. So all the rest of the membership of OPANAL are part of the TPNW. OPANAL also offers this platform where countries can engage in various discussions, but also regarding the international instruments, including the TPNW. Countries can also work together and encourage each other to promote this instruments. For instance, last year, the region achieved its universalization. Well, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty achieved its universalization in the treaty. So in the region, sorry. So now all the member states of OPANAL are parties of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And given the historical commitment of the region to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation, we hope to see someday the universalization of the TPNW in the region. So yeah, but on a general note, also I would like to highlight that Brazil is one of our most active member states that contributes very actively in the work of OPANAL. It is a member of the Council of OPANAL. So yeah, we work like very closely with it. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to briefly add that it was as part of the Council of OPANAL, the Council actually mandated the Secretary General of OPANAL and part of the Secretariat to participate last year in the first meeting of states parties in Vienna.
Oh, and yeah, I also forgot to mention that, yeah, Brazil signed but haven't ratified the TPNW, but it was very important that it actually participated in the first meeting of the states party. So Brazil follows the work of the states parties of the TPNW, and we hope that someday it will lead to the ratification of the treaty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tarja?
Yeah, just a short comment on the young people and particularly the universities. I think what happens is that in universities you study war and nuclear weapons and security policy, or you study peace movements and so forth. But the nuclear weapon-free zones, they fall between these 2 chairs. I don't know of any university that mentions the nuclear weapon-free zones in any of these courses. So I will, as chair of the Finnish Peace Union, I'll take the responsibility and try to have some experience with Finnish universities in introducing actually the nuclear weapon-free zones, both on the studies of security policy and on studies of peace. And just a short comment to Enkhsaikhan, the question of who can ask the opinion of the International Court of Justice, it's only the UN organization
Yeah.
So countries cannot do, like OPANAL was referring to the states or states organizations. It's only UN organizations. The EIAI could do it. The General Assembly can do it. Security Council can do it, but that's a limitation. Thank you.
But I think the non-nuclear weapon states have a majority there. If they really want, then we can do that. Well, I guess we're coming to the end of this session. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers and all the participants who've been following the events. And I would like to remind you that the second part of this webinar will be held a week from today at 1 o'clock. And what we will be focusing on is on the challenges for the Northeast Asian issue, which is very important. Then the Middle East. And the third one, of course, we're trying to find a person who might have time to discuss about the South Asian issue. Because I have already written a number of mails asking them whether they can speak on this issue, because after 1998, after the nuclear weapon tests, people believe that there is no way for other South Asian countries except for India and Pakistan to become to establish a nuclear weapon-free zones. So that's why I am thinking of inviting somebody to speak on this issue as well. So with this, I would like to thank you all again for the participation. Hopefully we'll see you in a week's time. And if you come with specific questions and so on, the organizers will be more than happy, to convey this to the next speakers so that they will have that in mind. With that, thank you very much. And I hope that it was a useful meeting for all of us. Thank you, and have a nice day, nice evening, and morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.